Great. Well, hi everyone, and welcome to my session. I'm going to talk to you about how I developed my AI literacy through the various experiences and practical things I did, with examples of how you can use AI in both your teaching and your research. I'm Lynette. I'm from Monash, from the Faculty of Education, and I have been working in AI literacy basically since ChatGPT came out. I'm coming to you today from Victoria, which is the first state to have officially signed a treaty with the First Nations people. So I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we are all learning today and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are with us today. As an educator, I recognise that learning has always taken place on country through story, relationships and connection to place. I honour the deep diversity of First Nations communities and the ongoing presence, knowledges and contributions of First Nations peoples to our community. And I celebrate the formal treaty that has been signed with the traditional owners, which signs into law Galangwal. And I celebrate this moment, recognising that this calls us to continue listening and respecting and acting in a spirit of reconciliation. So I'm going to start with some very basic, what is generative AI? And I will work throughout the session to explain to you what we now consider AI literacy to be. I will show you various examples of how you can use generative AI in your writing and research, as well as some examples from teaching, and talk about the ethical concerns that are associated with generative AI that you need to be aware of. I will talk to you about how you can accurately and ethically acknowledge generative AI in your work, and how you can therefore build AI literacy in your practice. So firstly, it's important to realize that AI in general has been around for many decades. It's been around for many years because it is used in all sorts of technologies, some of which you may be familiar with, like grammar checking software or Google Maps that takes you from point A to point B. Artificial intelligence is a type of technology that performs tasks that mimic human intelligence, and it uses particular technologies such as machine learning, natural language processing, and computer vision to understand what it is that we as humans would like it to do, and then it mimics our approaches to doing things and does some automatic things for us. Generative AI, however, is very different. It is not mimicking human intelligence. It is mimicking human creativity, which is why it is such a leap forward. For many years, it was thought that creativity was only the scope of humans. And so when Gen AI came around, this was thought to be a real leap forward. And it works differently to traditional AI in that it focuses not so much on those technologies I mentioned before, as on the algorithms and the neural networks that it is learning from very large amounts of data, and then it creates its own original pieces based on how it's learned. This also reveals why certain AIs work differently than other AIs, because they've learned in different ways from these vast amounts of data that they've been given. So it's important to realize that Gen AI can combine and reinterpret things in novel ways, which means that it produces output that is original. This is also the reason why all those plagiarism detection software that claims that it can detect AI use are not working, because it is not plagiarizing things, it is creating new things, and because language is it's a language model, so it can do language really well. And just because someone is using an M dash does not mean something is AI generated, because remember, it can be creative. So this is something that comes from Monash's staff website, but is from the article that's on the slide there originally. And it talks about some of the things that you can use AI, the generative AIs here, to help you in your work. And so these are related to research work. So you can see there are many, many things that even our university is listing as things that you can do. And I'm sure there are many more that they haven't even listed. The key thing is, though, that it can help you across all stages. if you know how to use it well. So if you know how to ask it the right questions, it can help you with idea generation or with structuring your assignments or your papers that you are writing, helping you analyze your data, with managing the ethics application or the blog post that you would like to write about your data. All of these sorts of things are things that it can do, but you need to know how to use it well, which is why AI literacy is now considered such an important attribute to have. So on my slide there, you can see my husky picture. Most of the pictures on these slides were generated with Leonardo AI, which I use to create graphics, mostly for my teaching. You can see the huskies there because I have huskies, so I've made my slides very personal, which engages the students as well, right? These are the AIs I use most often in my daily work at the moment. They do change because AIs come and go all the time. So our university runs on Google. So Google has a lot of built-in AI running on Gemini behind it. So, and also some just general AIs like the ones I talked about at the start that helps me respond to emails and chat messages from students quickly. I have a customized version of ChatGPT, which I will talk more about, that I use quite a lot. And I also have Gemini Pro. I have Grammarly. Grammarly is a general AI in some aspects, but also a generative AI in other aspects because it can write things for you. Grammarly is integrated in my Word, in my browser. So when I'm writing an email and I misspell epistemology for the 10th time, it'll magically tell me that I need to fix it, right? Image-wise, I use mostly Leonardo, like I said before, but I have also used DALL-E, and I'll show you some examples of that. Notebook LM is something that I use to create podcasts of my research, but it's also something that I encourage my students to use because it is a great way for them to think more deeply about their readings, because it can create podcasts of text. Real sounding people talking about articles that they are reading, which means that they can listen to it and actually engage with it on a different level and think more critically about the things that they're doing. And Otter I use for various reasons. Otter is a transcription AI that can not just transcribe some minutes for you, but it will actually create action items and things like that from the meetings as well. There are also many others. I will say to you, AI gets, like, there's a new one every day, if not every hour. Other ones that are quite common in research is Scopus AI, which in our library is now integrated, but is also available elsewhere. Perplexity and Research Rabbit, which are kind of like research assistant AIs. Consensus and Elicit, and we'll hear more about Elicit later. And ALIZE is the thematic analysis AI that was developed at MIT. So let me tell you how I got into AI. So Gen AI, most people are aware that it came really around when ChatGPT was out, but there were some aspects of it beforehand. And in December 2021, you'll note like a month before ChatGPT came out, there was this craze going around social media where there was an app that you could type some words in and it would create a picture. And I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. I'm just going to play with it. So I typed the title of the book that I was busy reading into it. All I did was type in research and teaching in a pandemic world, and I pressed enter, right? And this is the picture that it came up with. Now, this is 4 years ago, and yet it is actually a pretty good picture. And we were really quite enamored with this picture. I actually wanted to use this picture in our book, but at that stage, there was a lot of confusion of like, who owns this picture? Can we even use it? So in the end, we didn't use it as our cover. We went with the very boring standard Springer cover. But I was quite impressed by the capacity of this AI with just these few words being able to create a picture that did actually represent the content of the book, which sparked my interest in what else it could possibly do in the future. And then, of course, ChatGPT came out, and we were all there when all the many workshops were around telling us, like, it's either gonna, solve everyone's problems or it's gonna destroy the world. It was either a terrible thing for higher education because everyone was gonna cheat, or it's finally gonna revitalize the way teaching is done because people will start to focus on the process, not the product. And at that time, I came to believe that AI literacy is really something that is just going to be a key graduate attribute for the future. But this means that we as educators need to have our own AI literacy so that we can teach our students. So at that time, I was one of the first people to come up with what a definition of AI literacy, which I've bolded on the slide for you there, how to communicate effectively and collaboratively with Gen AI, and evaluate the trustworthiness of the results obtained. Now, this was in 2023. I have expanded this definition, and we now consider AI literacy to be consisting of 5 domains, which I will talk about later, but it's still the basic premise remains the same. You need to know how to work with it dialogically and evaluate the outputs and use it for your purposes. So how then do you become a prompt wizard? Now, I use this picture, which is also from Leonardo, to illustrate for you first a wizard, because it's aligned with my prompt wizard picture there. But more importantly, the importance of doing that evaluation and proper prompting and things. Because if you look at this picture initially, you're like, wow, cool, great wizard, right? But if you look more closely, you will notice that this wizard has 6 fingers. And this is an illustration of why it is important to ask the AI to do the things you want clearly, and also evaluate that output to make sure it's actually what you want. Maybe you did want a 6-finger wizard, or maybe you wanted a 5-finger wizard and you needed to tell it to fix the picture. So firstly, my pro tip to you is give your AI a role. Remember that the AI has access to basically all of human knowledge, right? Not every 100%, but very much almost all of human knowledge, which means if you don't tell it what you want it to be acting as, it'll just kind of assume, and it will give you different results. And if it doesn't know you, because it does learn about you as you go on, if it doesn't know you, it may give you results that you did not want. For example, if you said, hey, ChatGPT, are aliens real? Right? It could choose to go to some sort of scientific space and talk about the evidence for and against aliens, right? Or it could go to the X-Files section of the world and talk about how obviously aliens are real because here's all the X-Files examples, right? You haven't given it a role. So make sure that you tell it what you would like it to be. Like, act as an inclusive education researcher and do something, for example. So to illustrate this for you, this is my very first thing that I ever typed into ChatGPT. Act as a researcher, because remember I said it needs to have a role. And I hadn't learned about that in the news before I started trying to play with it. So I'm like, okay, act as a researcher, Anne. And then I thought, well, I need to be able to evaluate this. So I gave it a topic that I knew lots about. So I could see what it could do, because I was like, oh, let's see whether it's even, all it's hyped up to be. So I asked it to list the key concerns of doctoral education, because that's my area of research. This is what it came up with. Back in 2023, you will see ChatGPT does really like lists. It still does, but it does it a little bit differently now. But you can see the things that it's come up with. As someone working in the field, these are some of the main concerns of the doctoral education program, which I thought, wow, okay, well, if I'm new to a field, how great is this? Because it gives me a starting point, right? It gives me an overview of the field and where there are areas that I may be interested in exploring further. The other thing that's important is to be very clear and specific about what you want. So as an example, these are some of the prompts I frequently use. So write this paragraph in less words. It's very clear, really specifically. Copy paste paragraph, write this paragraph in less words. Write it in a more conversational or academic tone. You'll note I also use please. I do tend to be very friendly with the AI. I think that comes from my worry that one day maybe the robots will take over the world, and I'd like them to remember I was that person that said please and thank you. My favorite way of using it is to get it to critique my work. So how can I further improve this text? What are 5 critical thinking questions? Act as someone who disagrees with everything I said and critique my work. All of these are great prompts to help you improve the quality of your work. Now, in terms of the be clear and specific, this is an example of where it didn't work initially, and I'll talk more about my use of ChatGPT in research later. But one of the things I had is like, here's text. I'd like you to analyze it through Bourdieu's theory of practice and tell me about the norms and rules of academia, right? Which it did, but it was not really as detailed and as specific as I wanted, because what it had decided to do was use the basic English definition of norms and rules rather than the technical one that Bourdieu's theory requires. So it didn't actually talk about the stuff that I wanted it to. So I needed to redefine my prompt. And in the end, this is the prompt that I then used. I defined for it what I meant by norms and values and rules in the field and how they work. And using this definition, now explain to me how you see this happening in the transcript, which then gave me much more useful information. This is why you need to be clear and specific. You also need to provide context for it. So if we go back to my concerns of doctoral education example, at that point in time, I was also busy making my writing research questions workshop for the PhD students. So I thought, oh, okay, let's see what it can do. Create a research question about these concerns, right? Which was not a great prompt, but it did give a not bad research question, right? How do doctoral students experience? And then it lists all these concerns. The problem, of course, here is that it is very broad and no one can possibly do a PhD project on this question, right? It's too deep, too complex and overarching. It needs some more detail. So I needed to provide some context of where it should focus. So I said, refine the question to focus specifically on mental health, which it's now done. It's reformatted the question. This is actually a pretty good question, though I would probably separate it into 2 questions if it was me. But this is a great example of how it can be used to help students and researchers refine their research questions, because you can see how it rethinks the phrasing of things. And more importantly, it's actually pretty smart, right? So then I thought, oh, I'm just going to add some random theory that came out of my head at that point, use Foucault's concepts and reformulate it, because a good research question should have theory, right? And now you can see it has reformatted that question to use Foucault terms like the discourse, constructing certain ways of people experiencing things, etc. So this in particular, I think, is a particularly valuable thing for us as researchers when we're trying to communicate our ideas through the theory and you're like really grappling to find just the right word. You can ask it to help you come up with those things. And for students, this is a great way for them to see how theory influences the way questions are formatted. Now, I do encourage you to play and experiment. There are many, many AIs out there, and you need to find the ones that work for you. For example, I said to you, I use Leonardo AI, but there's also many other AI picture creation ones. So why not try some of the others and see which one works for you? Nano Banana is currently very popular, so perhaps you would like that one instead. Now, to illustrate this to you, I'll give you a few examples. Firstly, this is an example from teaching. So in my teaching, I teach a very niche research methods unit that teaches autoethnography. And I wanted to encourage the students to be more creative in their work. But I also knew that, like me, they probably weren't all very good at drawing and painting and things like that. And then I thought, well, Gen AI has the capacity to perhaps help them be more creative. So I modeled for them a pretend assignment where I was going to explore my academic identity as a teacher on the left and a researcher on the right. And I was going to use Gen AI to create these pictures. And I was going to use both the pictures that it finally created, but also the entire conversation about how I got to these pictures to interrogate why I felt this way. For example, in these pictures, at one point I said, make the background look more like Hogwarts, right? Because I see academia as, old and well established in these old ancient buildings, which is why you can see those sorts of backgrounds in the picture. That's a form of data that I could use in my pretend assignment. And this worked really well. It encouraged a lot of play and experimenting with the students. And this was back in the beginning of 2024. I am still using this now in the multiple iterations of the unit that has happened since. For example, this year I decided to go with a very popular social media trend, create an action figure of myself. So this is the final action figure that it created. I will highlight to you, it was also kind of creepy because it created a picture of me with clothes that I actually kind of have in my closet, which means it knows more about me than I really thought it did. But that was also interesting because then in my class, I could dress up like my action figure and go there and have that discussion with the students. You will also see it has lots of really cool things. It also has some problems. For example, if you look at the bottom, it doesn't actually say Dr. Lynette, it says Dr. Annette, right? But it was not really the perfectness of the picture that was important. It was the process and the thoughts and feelings that it elicited that were important. It also created for me a back of the box description, which includes my signature moves and how I have different things that I do and value. It even had a caution, make a systematic transformation label on it. And I also had an action figure that came from it as well. So once again, this was used in the class to illustrate how you can use generative AI in your assignments as a way to help you explore yourself. And I then wrote a whole research paper on how this is a legitimate form of data generation, which has now been published, accepted for publication, this one. And the other pictures were in the AI literacy framework, which I've gave you the link for before. So what worked well about this? It created a space where there was play for purpose. And I'm encouraging you, as someone trying to experiment with AI, play with a purpose to learn how you can use these effectively. So in my particular use of this picture AI, it helped the people to reveal the layers of meaning they saw about themselves for their particular research projects, right? Because remember that visual methods enable emotions and understanding below the surface, which words can't always do. And it also gives those alternative ways of expressing and accessing things, which is quite important, particularly if you're doing creative research. It also helped people to more deeply explore themselves. So it's a tool for self-reflexivity. Like, why was there was, for example, a picture that I really despised. Why did I despise it so much? What about that makes me see things in certain ways? Like, why is my worldview clashing with the picture that it created? And also, it helps to think about the more critical aspects of AI in itself and how it works, some of the biases that it brings up. So the picture that I really hated was a picture of me dressed kind of like a swimsuit model at some sort of beauty pageant, right? Which clearly did not represent me as a teacher at a university. But that reflects biases, right? Of, what is considered a good picture of a woman in society these days. Also, when I initially asked it to create a picture of a university professor, many of you may guess that it kept creating a picture of an old white man. And I had to actually prompt and tell it, no, I would like it to not be an old white man. Please do this, right? Because that's not who I see myself as. So this helps to also create space in the classroom where you can talk about the more ethical dimensions of AI, which I will talk about later, all the different ethics. But it creates a space in the classroom where through that play and experimentation, they can do that sort of thinking and critically engage. The other thing to note is that you need to split complex tasks. So imagine the AI is your research assistant, right? If you have a human research assistant and you say to them, here are 20 tasks I would like you to do, it is likely that they probably won't do the 20 tasks very well. They will do some well, some really badly. Maybe they forget about 2. So you need to give them few things at a time and explain to them what you want them to do, right? So it's the same for the AI. Split the complex task into simpler sections of tasks. So to illustrate this, this is from my work using ChatGPT for qualitative data analysis. I analyzed interview transcripts through ChatGPT, and there was a series of 31 prompts that I developed. Now, I could have just said, hey, ChatGPT, here's my picture, or here's my transcript, please analyze it and tell me what themes you come up with. And it would have given me some stuff, but it would not have revealed the things that I was really interested in, maybe, or it would only have done things at a surface level because I haven't told it what I would like it to focus on, right? Just like if you were telling your research assistant what experiment to do, you have to actually tell them which experiment you want. Otherwise, they may do something else that you didn't want. So in the end, I developed 31 prompts. There's a few of them on the screen, but you can access them all online for free. And I put the transcript in, and then I asked the question one at a time. And I got really good data analysis from that because I had guided the research assistant, in this case, my non-human research assistant, to help me understand the data. This is some examples of some of the answers that it got. It is actually really good if prompted well. Here it is analyzing a transcript through Bourdieu's understanding of power. And the very next question, I asked it to understand it, to analyze it now through Foucault's understanding of power, which of course is different. And so it's really interesting to see that it is able to just make that switch, cognitively switch from one theoretical framework to another, which is actually harder for a human to do. So that is quite useful in helping you as the researcher think about what is it you actually want and what do you want to get out of this analysis process. It's also able to understand implicit meaning. So of course it can understand the actual words that it said because it's a language model, but it can also understand when things aren't actually said, but behind the words, it may still indicate things, like the example on the screen. Well, there are nuanced indications that could be interpreted. For example, here's some examples that you as the researcher can then go further and analyze whether this is in fact indicating, in this case, imposter syndrome. In our study overall, we found that, yes, it was good at doing that first layer basic coding. It could uncover that implicit meaning, but of course, you as the researcher also always need to have that epistemic authority over the output that it generates, right? Don't just copy paste it, always do further work. But because it is helping you focus on certain things and you can then look at that more in depth, it creates a space of empowerment for you as the researcher, because you can then use your higher order thinking and critical research skills that you've developed over many years to do that more in-depth research. Additionally, in our study, we also shared the Gen AI analysis with the participants, and that created a space where the participants were really involved in that co-creation process, where they were really engaged with what Gen AI had said about them. One of them even said that they needed to spend several years with their psychologist unpacking the new insights they got about themselves from the Gen AI analysis. Also, pro tip, let the AI explain why it says the things it does. So for example, this is Grammarly, right? Grammarly is fixing some grammar here, and you could just, copy what it says and off you go. Or you can actually look at why it is saying these things. It gives some reasons for why it is a problem, right? This is ChatGPT, where I asked it to take the paragraph and fix the grammar and then explain why it did what it did. So it's fixed the grammar on the right. It did a very good job because, once again, it's a language model. But this is an example of some of the explanation of changes that it gave. Now, this is useful because it helps you as the user evaluate the output it gave. So you can think about, is this actually aligning with what I'm trying to do? Additionally, if it keeps telling you you have a problem with verb tenses, for example, then you probably need to do some work on improving your verb tenses. So it's also a great learning tool. Now, then you also need to consider some of the ethical issues that are associated with Gen AI. Or there are many, and they are entirely legitimate. And you may encounter students in your classroom that have entirely legitimate ethical reasons for not wanting to use the AI, right? So you may have thought about some of these now. You can see here my deeply thinking husky asking you to think a little bit about what some ethical things may be. We have developed an ethical framework for AI use, which I'm going to go through. It conveniently spells out ethical, which is a nice way to remember it. So firstly, it is important to always consider the policies in your particular context. Please note there are definitely different guidelines and policies in different countries, in different jobs, in different institutions. So always be sure that you know that you are doing what is allowed in your particular context. Secondly, this is something that a lot of people, the bias part is something that a lot of people know about, the social impacts, but there are also several others. So social impacts refer to some ways that the AI is trained, but also the way it works that impacts society perhaps adversely. The biases come from the fact that it is trained from our human data, right? And we as humans are biased. We may not always notice our biases, but we certainly have some biases, and these are reflected in the way we have for all time communicated about things. And this means that it has learned about our biases. And sometimes that comes out in what it produces, like my example of the figures we had before. The most obvious example of that was quite recently when Elon Musk took off some of the guardrails of Grok, the X Gen AI, and it let it just learn from X. And anyone who's been on X recently knows that it's a very bad space sometimes. And within one day, Grok had learned that it was supposed to be like those many, angry people on X, and it started calling itself a mecha-Nazi, a mechanic Nazi, and it started preaching Nazi things. It was so dramatic that they had to actually stop it to fix the problem because it had learned from its context that it was in that this was what pleased people on X. This is an example of some of the biases that are available out there that it can learn from. And if we as users don't actually evaluate what it says, we can fall into the trap of missing those biases and further perpetuating them. There's also the concern of the digital divide. And I'm not here so much talking about who has access and who has not, because most people can theoretically access free versions of AI now, though, of course, there are some socioeconomic issues there. What I'm talking about more is the digital divide in skill, who knows how to use it and who don't. Because those who have the skill to use it well will leap forward a lot faster than some of the others. The other one to consider, which a lot of people don't really consider, but students are very passionate about, is the sustainability component of AIs. Generative AI uses an immense amount of power and water in particular to, one, manage the data centers and to keep the data centers cool. So this is environmentally an issue, right? So I will highlight the big AI companies are really working on this, finding ways to power their data centers with renewable energy, for example, but it is still a legitimate problem, which some of your students, and I've certainly had that, where some students refuse to use it because they're concerned of the environment. In my case, I approach this as I will use it with purpose. I'm not going to just get it to create 1,000 pictures for me because I think it's kind of fun, but I'm going to get it to create a specific picture that I will then use multiple times in many different ways so that I am using it as much as possible and my footprint is as small as possible. The other thing that is important is you need to understand how AI systems work. So I've talked to you a little bit about that I'm not expecting you to be a technological IT expert in how these things work, but it is important to know what it can and can't do. And I've given you some details about that today. Importantly, it is always important to indicate your use of the AI. And there are different ways in which you can do that, depending on your context. In general, you need an AI acknowledgement. This is the acknowledgement that we use in Monash and that I encourage my students to use and I use myself. A clear explanation of the AI you used, details about why you used it, and sometimes the prompts you used, depending on what you're using it for. A clarification of what you did with the output, and a statement of responsibility for the final version, because remember, you as the researcher have the ultimate epistemic responsibility for what is said in that paper. So you can't just go copy paste and hope it says what you think. You have to take responsibility for what you've put on paper. So this is a practical example. I acknowledge I used ChatGPT for what? To refine my phrasing and reduce my word count. I do this a lot because I write qualitative research and there's always an issue with word count. And you will see the suggestions were significantly adapted to reflect my own voice and style. And it was also adapted during peer review. And I take responsibility for the final version. And an example of that, this is one of my papers where it has been published, because this is an ethical practice. In my teaching, I always talk in the referencing workshop for students that, referencing is distinguishing between your idea and the idea of someone else. That workshop has been expanded and is now referencing and using AI with academic integrity. And now I say, referencing is distinguishing between your work and the work of someone else. The AI acknowledgement is distinguishing between your work and the work of something else. It's an aspect of ethical responsibility and integrity. This is the acknowledgement that I now use, given my use of AI over several years now. I have moved beyond like using it for just some things. Instead, I'm talking about how I'm now using it as a critical friend to critique my ideas and still refine my phrasing and word count. So I'm seeing it as more of an integral research partner rather than just a tool like, for example, Word or EndNote would be. But it still takes the same approach. Suggestions were adapted and I take responsibility. Always critically engage with and revise the outputs. Like I said before, please don't just copy paste. Always evaluate whether this is actually what it is that you would like to say. It is always better to use versions of the AI that are protected. So, for example, the free ChatGPT is great, but it can technically use your conversations to train its models. Now, it's important to note it's not like it's really interested in like the actual data you're putting in there. It's more interested in the conversation you're having and how you're responding to it and whether it's actually doing what you want it to do, right? But still, if you're not using the protected version, theoretically, it is possible that some of that data could be used to train the model. So consequently, it is better to use the protected versions. In my examples that I talked about before, I got a grant to get the enterprise level of ChatGPT, which does not, or at least they say they do not, use it to train their models. Always, and I know this sounds a bit tedious, but always at least look at the agreements, see what is the particular AI's policy for privacy and use of data, so that at least you are aware of what it is you are doing before you put something in it. Please never put your credit card details or some really personal medical information or something like that into AI. But still, even if you're using the protected ones, make sure you know what it is that they say they are going to do with the stuff that you put in there. And then finally, always commit to ongoing education, because as I said before, AIs change all the time. ChatGPT very recently, I think it was about a month ago, introduced their really advanced reasoning mode that has the same reasoning capacity as a PhD level person. Gemini and ChatGPT recently released their agents that can go off and do things for you. Gemini last week announced that it would be able to, for example, if you're looking for something on the internet to buy, and it's, let's say you want to buy a new laptop, it will be able to go and call all the laptop places in your local area and ask them what their prices are and what's the best one that they could do, and then tell you, it's best to buy it here. And even you could then give it your credit card details and it will go buy it for you. Every few weeks, some new kind of mind-blowing update comes along. So make sure to keep looking at these things and what happens out there. Educate yourself, because what the students are always 2 steps ahead, and you want to try and know what they know so that you can work better yourself as well. So then finally, what then is AI literacy? So as I said, we've, through our future research from that paper, we came up with 5 dimensions of AI literacy. So firstly, there is the foundational dimension. This is like basically, where do I even find ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini? How do I log in? How do I ask it a question, right? The really basic understanding of what an AI actually is. Then there's the conceptual domain, where you can get the information and you know how to repurpose it for your specific use, right? This is sort of where people think this is what they think AI can do when they think that it is like a tool, like Word or EndNote. But if you want to be AI literate, you need to move beyond this. Well, this is good that you can repurpose information for your specific purpose. You need to move to the social dimension, where you understand that the AI is actually not just a tool, it's a dialogic partner working with you, shaping the way you are thinking and doing things. It's actually co-creating knowledge with you. And once you start seeing it that way, this is the stage where you become AI literate. The other dimension is the ethical dimension, which we talk about. It's important to know what the ethical aspects of AI is or are, and what you would like to agree to do and not to do because of who you are as a person. And then finally, as with all technological use, it is underpinned by our emotions. So when we are scared that Skynet is going to happen, Terminator is going to come and destroy us, the robots will take over the world, you are much less likely to even have a go, right? Alternatively, if you think technology is the greatest thing ever, you're going to play with it and do all the things. It's important to realize that our emotions underpin our engagement and our perceived understanding of how good or bad something is. So it's important to be aware of our own emotions and what we think when we use these technologies. So we developed the AI framework, which you can see here, and it is that social dimension that makes you become really AI literate, when you learn how to see the Gen AI not just as a tool, but as a collaborative thinking partner that can help support your own reflection, creativity, higher order thinking. Finally, I'll just highlight some other work that I've done. One of the things that we did find is that it is actually a really good tool to increase the visibility of ideas that may have been previously hidden. This in academia, for example, is because research is often published in English. And so this means that ideas that are published in other languages are often marginalized, and you never hear about them because you can't read whatever language they are written in. But AIs help multilingual scholars to be able to convey their ideas into English in a way that is accessible for others, which means that a broader range of scholars can contribute to academia and thereby challenge the traditional ways of thinking, which I think is great for all of us. It'll help to create and uplift knowledge and create more inclusive spaces where everyone's ideas are valued and contested in a space to advance knowledge in the field. Now, I will have some time for questions, but I will highlight to you all these things are in my videos, which you can just find on YouTube. And you can always contact me for questions. I will re-copy paste that thing that I put at the start, which is all the important links from today's presentation. I will put it back there again so you can find the information. And now I have some time for questions.